One thing I wish parents knew was that one of the hallmarks of dyslexia is inconsistency. We typically do not see learners who have all poor performance because often those students are already identified through the school system. And typically, what we find when we do see them, it's not just dyslexia, but it's something else. Because in order to be identified in school, you have to be profoundly failing. And that is actually what we find rarely the picture of dyslexia. The picture of dyslexia is that most of us read up to a point using compensatory reading.
What is a myth of dyslexia you wish parents knew?
So again, just to kind of bring it all back, the number one myth that bothers me most about dyslexia is that if your child can read, that they don't have dyslexia, where the truth is that most people with dyslexia can read up to a point.
What's the most common age for identification?
Well, you would think it would be our little guys, but actually a lot of young kids, because they're so bright and they're trying so hard, they are reading, but they've kind of invented their own system of reading. And it's that compensatory reading system that uses visual memory. They can often use this for quite a while. And so sometimes we don't see them. We often start to hear from kids around about fourth grade, and we suspect that's because of a couple of things. One is that the type of reading has changed. We're no longer learning to read. We're now reading much more in order to learn. The vocabulary starts to outstrip the visual ability to memorize words, and also the volume of reading increases without the predictable storylines. So that's one thing that starts to happen in school where kids will start to get kind of glitchy in their reading. And then the other thing is that this is also a time that we introduce a lot of math that requires a lot of memory. So often about fourth grade, we'll start seeing more issues. Unfortunately, we don't actually see most kids until about sixth grade, and sometimes it trends a little bit higher. And part of that is because about fourth grade or third grade, when their reading systems get a little bit glitchy, these kids are told to try harder. You got it yesterday. I know you got it. I know you have it. If you try really hard, you can get it today. And when they can't get it that day because of memory issues or whatever kinds of executive choices they have to make, we then think it's a matter of effort or focus, when really it's a matter of not being able to access visual memory, which makes sense because visual memory it's impressive, but it's not very efficient or reliable.
So if a parent has a child that appear to be reading, what are some clues that they are using their compensatory reading skills, their visual memory, instead of actually reading?
There are several things that we can look for in kids who are reading, and they are reading using visual memory instead of using language processing. And one of those is inconsistency. When you have a bright kid that is struggling in unexpected and inconsistent ways with reading, we probably want to look at the idea of the possibility of dyslexia. And this is kind of hard to do because what we have found is, especially with kids who are twice exceptional, really bright, whatever you want to call them. But what we see is with bright kids that also are struggling with dyslexia, that their intelligence tends to mask how much they're struggling with dyslexia. And their dyslexia tends to mask how bright they really are sometimes. So, we as parents start to think, well, he was so bright when he was a kid, his vocabulary is so advanced, and now I can hardly get him to do anything in school. That's actually probably a little bit more predictive of dyslexia than perhaps looking at their reading level.
So in addition to that, I would also say some practical things to look for, that if you hear your kiddo reading out loud and you're noticing them adding on suffixes, dropping off suffixes, changing, adding in, leaving off small connecting words. Those are the types of things we also see frequently.
Yes. There's another way that we can start to look for it a little bit too, and that's in speech, because reading is actually a sound system, and dyslexia is actually a issue with processing sound called phonological awareness. And so often we can hear it in speech. There's very telltale signs when they're younger, but let's just say we have a sixth or seventh grader who we have not identified yet with dyslexia, but let's just say they do. And they're reading at grade level, but we're starting to see some inconsistencies. And then we start to listen to their speech. And one of the issues of speech that we can notice in older learners is that they tend to mumble or mute the ends of their words. So instead of saying seek, they might say see. And we don't know if they've said seen, seem, sing, sink, or see, unless it's in the context of a sentence. But we hear all of these really soft endings in these words. And often it's because that's how they have learned them or think that's what they are because of limitations they had in phonological processing when they were younger.